protesters, and I'm the chair of the Philip Larkin Society. I don't normally shout, but the microphones are not working. So let me know if you can't hear me at the back. I once went to a training session when I was a junior lecturer at Queen's University, Belfast, about how to be a lecturer. And it went over a few weeks. After the first week, I remember going back, we all got together again with the new lecturers, and we were asked what we'd learned and how we felt about that first week. And one lecturer said, well, he'd done as he'd been advised in this large lecture theatre. He'd asked whether the people at the back could hear him, and there was one response saying, yes, I can hear you, but I'm very willing to change places with anybody who can't. Which kind of ruined his confidence. Yes, it's my pleasure really to welcome you here as chair of the Larkin Society. It's been an event which has been in our diary, well, it feels like about a decade. Probably not that long, but of course it's to do with the centenary of Larkin's birth in 2022. And our colleague Don Lee, who was very familiar to many of you here, he represented the society at your conferences and at your committees. He was the one who, I think, advocated our case. And it's a great shame that he's not been able to join us this weekend. So I'd like to convey my thanks to him for being responsible for having this here. I'd like to say welcome to the Hull History Centre, this extraordinary building which has been open for a dozen years, something like that. It was quite a novelty in the sense that the University of Hull and the City Council put in a joint bid to the National Heritage Lottery Fund to combine their archives and make them available to the city more in a combined way. That's how the Larkin archives, which were previously stored in the Brynmore Jones Library, ended up down here. And they are used, believe me. And there is a display of material in the, what they call the library, the reading room, at the end of this building, which you can access after the morning session. It'll be there throughout lunch, and indeed it's going to remain there for a couple of weeks. It's a display of Larkin archives and what we call Larkinalia. These are objects retrieved from 105 Newland Park after Monica Jones's death, and the Society paid for the privilege of looking after those objects, and occasionally they come out for display, most notably in Hull's City, a year of City of Culture, a big exhibition at the Brynmore Jones Library, which was attended by about 12,000 people, which is extraordinary. So I welcome you to this place. Of course, it's going to be the focus of James's talk later, so I won't go into any details. I'd also like to welcome you to the city of Hull. Can I ask how many people, I mean, some people live here, of course, but how many people have not been to the city before? That's quite a lot. And in a way, it's not surprising. You know, we're very aware that we are on the way to nowhere, which is one of the reasons that Larkin loved the place, and why a lot of the residents of the place, whether they're born here or came here, like the place too. It has a sense of being different. It's an interesting city, and you will, those of you who go in this afternoon's walk, it looks as though it's going to be fine, with, we describe him here as the legendary Paul Schofield. He's legendary in Hull, but his fame goes beyond that. About a few years ago, he got the Silver Award for the Visit England National Awards for the single person who contributed most to tourism in the UK. Wow. And that's quite something. And I discovered on Facebook this morning it's his birthday today, so he's taking time out of his birthday to join us. But if you don't mind, I'm going to read something which will be familiar to those from the Larkin Society. It's the foreword to a book of poems by new Hull poets. And the foreword was written by Larkin. And it gives the lie, really, to those people in the city, and there are still quite a few, who only remember Larkin saying that Hull is a dump. A lot of the local residents sometimes agree, mind you, and that's a bit of a shame. Larkin was disparaging about the city as he was disparaging about everywhere else he lived and went, but particularly in his first year or two, after having come from Belfast, where he loved working there, and he thought it was the best place for his creative endeavours, and he clearly missed it, as I did. I came from Belfast to Hull, and it's a remarkable place and a sad place to leave. So he wrote this foreword. Poetry, like prose, happens anywhere. Hull got its clearance on this from Andrew Marvell many years ago. And if that singular member of Parliament will have little in common with today's ancient and modern city, lodged unexpectedly in a triangle of flat country between the Humber and the North Sea, it's still as good a place to write in as any. It's where poets reside happily. Better, in fact, than some, for a place cannot produce poets. It can only not prevent them. And Hull is good at that. It neither impresses nor insists. When your train comes to rest in Paragon Station, I'm assuming quite a few can come up by train, when your train comes to rest in Paragon Station against a row of docile buffers, you are light with an end-of-the-line sense of freedom. Nice. And that's having got away from London, of course. Signs in foreign languages welcome you. That was true in 1981, it's no longer true. Outside is a working city, yet one neither clenched in the blackened grip of the Industrial Revolution, so not like Bradford or Leeds or Sheffield. It's not industrial in that sense. Yet, nor hiding behind a cathedral to pretend it's York or Canterbury. Unpretentious, recent, full of shops and special offers, like a television commercial. It might be Australia or America, until you come upon Trinity House or the dock offices, for Hull has its own sudden elegances. And those of you going to walk, you really must look out for the architecture. It is extraordinary for that. People are slow to leave it, quick to return. And there are others who come, as they think, for a year or two and stay a lifetime. I came in 1972 promising my wife we'd be away within 3 years, and we're still here. Sensing that they have found a city that is in the world, yet sufficiently on the edge of it to have a different resonance. Behind Hull is the plain of Holderness. Some people who don't know their geography think Hull is on the coast. It's not, it's in an estuary. And beyond Hull there's another 21, 24 miles before you come to the North Sea coast. Behind Hull is the plain of Holderness, lonelier and lonelier. And after that, the birds and lights of Spurn Head, and then the sea. One can go 10 years without seeing these things, yet they're always there, giving Hull the air of having its face half turned towards distance and silence, and what lies beyond them. These poems, the anthology, are not about Hull, yet it is unseen in all of them. The permission of a town that lets you write. And at the end, Jean Hartley, who was involved, of course, in publishing the Leicester Sea when Larkin first came to Hull, she describes that as a love poem to the city. It is beautifully written, and it's too easily forgotten. So, enjoy the conference. Very grateful for people who've done the organisation. Very grateful to ALS for coming here in the first place. I've got one bit of logistical news. Tomorrow morning, the meeting place for the walk come visit is now at the University Library, the Brynmore Jones Library on campus at 10:30, Philip. Yeah. So there are buses from the bus station that will get you there. So 10:30, Brynmore Jones Library on the Cottingham Road campus. And simply that will give us an opportunity to look at Larkin's office to see what is in the library. Whereas they're closed between 12 and 2. Not that they're closed, but they have a lot of staff to look after. So have a great weekend, and I'm going to ask Claire now. Should I say a few words?
So we're without microphones. I hope, can you hear me? I'm going to project. Can you hear me? Good. Well, it's fantastically good to be able to be back in person. This is my 6th and last year as the president of the ALS, but it's only my 4th annual general meeting because, of course, we've lost out on 2, and that's extremely disappointing for the Leo Walmsley Society and everybody who's gearing up to go to Robin Hood's Bay a couple of years ago, and then last year the Highgate conference had to be cancelled. So it really is lovely to see everybody back and to have this renewed sense of the society as, you know, people with leaflets to bring us and things to share, and actually to get together in person again. The day, as you know, is going to be James Underwood talking to us this morning about Larkin. Then we got the lunch, we got the AGM in the afternoon, and then I was so delighted to hear from Graham about Paul Schofield, the phenomenon, because that's going to be great, having the walk around the Hull Larkin Trail, and then we got dinner tonight. So this is our day of restitution and acquaintanceship. But unfortunately, it is my last year coming to the conference, and all the years that when I was asked to do this, to be the president, I'm very honoured to do so. It did really strike me how there's this potential of the group. You know, we've got all these literary societies with many members. There's a huge kind of outreach that the ALS represents, and that I'm very glad that it's been slightly hard. You know, we were harnessing some of that power to not just to associate with each other, share our enthusiasms about our various favourite authors or favoured authors, and many of us have more than one, of course. This doesn't even cover my society membership. I think there probably isn't space on some people's.
I said just put the number 1.
Exactly. Let's just rank them in order. But anyway, you know, so many of us have many different interests, both professional and recreational, in these lives of these authors and their works, and promoting them and sharing them with each other. It's a kind of joyful association from that point of view. And then, of course, there's the practical side that the ALS does, which is to facilitate information sharing. But I do hope that there's been some impact from our concern about library closures, I mean, over the last 5 years, I felt this that was a very appropriate thing to get behind as a group of like-minded, literary-minded people to celebrate the importance of public libraries and to try to prevent our local libraries being closed or neglected. And I think very much before the pandemic that was terribly obvious how valuable libraries are as places to be. I mean, actually as physical spaces within communities, how valued they are, not just by readers necessarily, but by people who want to associate with the values that are represented by the library. You know, Doris Lessing said a public library is the most democratic thing in the world, and it truly is. It's got a civic, an intellectual, a personal resonance, which, you know, we're losing that. We have been losing it over the last couple of decades, much to many people's sorrow and the detriment of ordinary people in ordinary communities. You know, if a library is something you have to go miles to get to and have a card and be intimidated going into, that's a failure, a social failure. So I do hope that the ALS will continue to put some weight behind any campaigns like Libraries Connected, which is the new Librarians Association body. I mean, it couldn't be more appropriate to be in Larkin land at this point. You know, like the point where librarianship and creativity join. You know, it's got a big explosion saying Philip Larkin, and we're going to be seeing James is going to be talking about archives and Larkin's librarianness, but also we've got the Larkiniana in how do you say it? The Larkin stuff we can also see today. That's a very, very sophisticated phrase, isn't it? The Larkin stuff. But as I say, before the pandemic, I mean, I was really thinking about libraries as sites, locations in which all sorts of good cultural things happen. But actually, during the pandemic, what really struck me personally is libraries as this intellectual resource which has been cut off from. I mean, I found it terribly difficult in all sorts of ways. I mean, not just missing going to the library, physically going to the library. I live in Oxford, so I've got the Bodleian, you know, within a cycle ride. But even being a university teacher with a university card and apparently access to university databases, it still was not possible to do certain types of research during the pandemic. And this was actually devastating, because I went into that period hoping to write a book about Mary Russell Mitford. Is there a society for Mary Russell Mitford? No, there isn't. Let's have one. But although actually she's somebody you can buy first editions of, not for very much money, so that was rather nice. I had the excuse of getting on A-books and spending a lot of dosh, getting some fantastic early editions of Mary Russell Mitford. But of course, Reading University Library has a huge archive of unpublished Mitford material, which I was in no way able to get any sort of access to. And when it hit me how difficult, impossible it would be to write a book about Mary Russell Mitford during the lockdown, that was one of several reasons, but it was a very strong reason why I couldn't do that book. You know, so if you're a researcher and a writer and you're going along and suddenly you can't read the stuff, and even things that are on these fantastic digitized databases, you know, many of which are just miraculous. But if your card isn't the right card, and you can't get into that database, you can't get onto the online services, you come up against these roadblocks, and it just became actually impossible to go on with that project. And the project I segued to, which I've actually just finished this book, and it's in proof now, it's a book about Catherine Mansfield. Not to say that Catherine Mansfield is not a subject one needs to go, I mean, wouldn't it be nice to go to New Zealand, to go to the Alexander Turnbull Library and look at the stuff, or go to Chicago and go to the Newbury Library and look at the stuff? That was not on, but my book was a hybrid book, and so it was a book adapted to pandemic conditions. But again, I mean, I found myself up against impossible bits where I couldn't actually read, say, Catherine Mansfield's letters, because they haven't been digitized yet. So you couldn't actually get online and read those books. So I bought some of them, and some of them just are not available. Volume 4 is really hard to get. So I ended up borrowing books from friends who happened to have them. And I'm very fortunate because I lived down the road from Hermione Lee, and she had the whole set, Catherine Mansfield letters. So she lent me volumes like 3 and 5, and got me volume 4 out of the English Faculty Library on her card. So that was good. But I mean, without this kind of private, secret borrowing thing, so there became a network, and I used other friends as well to lend me Catherine Mansfield texts, you know. So one had a sort of pre-literate almost kind of society of actually trying to share these things privately. And I did get enough of the text together and got access to them. But I must say it was very, very difficult. Mind you, some of the archivists and the librarians who were possibly, you know, underemployed during some of these pandemic months and years did do incredibly kind things. You know, I got in touch with the archivist in Chicago, just wanting her to, if she could check something on a manuscript for me. I needed to know if it said June 1908 or just 1908. And not only did she go to the typescript, actually, of Mansfield's story and look at it, she then scanned the whole thing for me. She photographed the whole typescript and posted it to me. So I didn't just see the actual evidence of what I'd asked to have solved, but she showed me the whole thing, which was incredibly kind. Similarly, some of the librarians in Wellington were incredibly kind. They digitised some cassette tapes of Catherine Mansfield's sisters being interviewed in 1962, you know, which I would have actually had to travel to Wellington to listen to in a special reading room otherwise. So there were incredible acts of generosity and helpfulness. And then, but then also the conditions of the lockdown meant that ordinary access to the libraries that one would expect to be able to have just wasn't on. It was all extraordinary. So that was a very strange kind of library withdrawal, I suppose. I just felt very, very disturbed at not being able to access those things. But also in last year, which was the worst year, wasn't it? We had this extraordinary Bronte and Austen and Burns and Scott trove of manuscripts that came up for sale. The Honresfield Library, which again, Marty and the ALS publicised that in the society and got as much support going as we could for that campaign to save the Honresfield Library, which was this amazing collection which had been in private hands for 90 years, that came up for sale last year at a knockdown price of £15 million. Truly, it was a really bargain price considering the absolute treasures that were in that collection. And I must say, by about sort of August, I was thinking, there's no chance this is going to get, you know, so many people had done, you know, cake bakes and fun runs, and there was this incredible sort of surge of feeling towards wanting to get the money together. But when you're trying to get even a bargain price of 15 million together from a few, you know, kind and charitable fundraising events, it doesn't go very far. So, I mean, people were bursting a gut, and it was still, you know, the sum was about £25,000-30,000. But then, you know, fairy godmother-like, not in the Friends of the National Libraries, that association, which is a charitable consortium, and the Blavatnik Trust came in, and there was some government money was put in too, and lo and behold, it did get saved for the nation. And I think this is one of the great sort of heartwarming stories from the last couple of years, that this magnificent collection, which the Law family created in the late 19th century, and then their descendants hung on to it for 90 years without, it didn't have any public access, but one or two scholars had been allowed to see items there, but very much under sort of under cover of darkness sort of thing. But these things came back to light. They had been transcribed. All the Bronte stuff was, the texts were known, unlike the little book that was for sale earlier this year. But they hadn't been actually handled. And I was allowed to go to Sotheby's last year before the sale and look at the two Austen letters, very famous letters of Jane Austen to her sister, and these incredible Bronte items, and the Rob Roy manuscript, the Lay of the Last Minstrel, Burns's Commonplace book, these amazing manuscripts. And the Emily Bronte is the prized item of the collection, the Emily Bronte poems, her manuscript book of poems, which again, it has been transcribed, but it hasn't been seen or handled for 90 years. I was allowed to look at that. And it's got Charlotte Bronte's pencil annotations in it. It's absolutely fascinating, beautiful, precious item. And also, Emily Bronte's copy of the sisters' 1846 poems, you know, their first joint publication. They published anonymously as Currer, Ellis and Acton Bell. And they've got Emily Bronte's copy of that book with her marginalia in it, which is an absolutely astonishing item. So, you know, to go to a back room in Sotheby's and to see these things, and then hope and pray that the nation got the money together, which it has done. So now there are, I think there are 1,400 books in that collection. There are many manuscripts, including these precious ones, and they're going to 68 different institutions all around the four nations. I mean, again, many are going to the National Library of Scotland. There are things going to specific writers' houses and writers' house museums, as you'll know. I mean, Chawton House is getting one of the letters, the Jane Austen Museum is getting the other one, the Bronte Parsonage is getting an immense haul of wonderful material, British Library is getting them, and many provincial libraries are also getting items. And it really is one of the best bits of news I've heard in the cultural world for some years. So I was very delighted by that. But also I noticed that last week, or perhaps even this week, Tracy Chevalier said that that notebook of Emily Bronte's poems has actually landed at the British Library now. That's where it's actually arrived at the British Library, so it's now in the possession of the BLI. And I presume that they'll stick it straight in their treasures room, you know, that wonderful room where you go in and it's just mind-boggling, isn't it, all the manuscripts you see there. I can't imagine they'll do anything other than just stick it under some glass so that everybody can see it immediately. But I would like to encourage all the members of the ALS to realise that the things that aren't on public display all the time, that, you know, all these libraries have fantastic items which you as a member of the public are perfectly legitimate, you know, allowed to go and look at and to ask for, and look in the catalogue for your favourite writers, see what they've got. And sometimes it's not just manuscripts, it's objects, you know, things that belonged to the writer, fascinating items. See if you can get access to them. Ask a librarian. They very often will burst a gut to let you see things that aren't necessarily, you know, they might be in storage, they might be in a box in the cellar of the library, but, you know, you can see amazing stuff. So I'd just like to, you know, finish by saying that I hope everybody continues to use their libraries. Access these things, ask to see them. You might also then, of course, meet a lovely librarian, you know, somebody whose work it is to curate, to preserve, and to promulgate these items. You know, you might get Philip Larkin, the contemporary version of Philip Larkin, overseeing their collection. They will know a lot of things, and they'll want you to see them. They'll want you to share them, which is what I think the ALS is all about. It's about accessing and sharing our enthusiasms and hanging together for our, you know, for the common literary good. So that's all I'm going to say about that today. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing James talk about Larkin and having a very Larkin-y day. And out on the edge of an event, I think, at the end of the line. I love that, the piece, Graham, that you read, the description of Hull. Because it's my first trip to Hull, and even 12 hours in, you know, I'm gobsmacked by it. It's wonderful. So, thank you very much. And do I introduce James?
If you would.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to introduce James.